Hey everyone, thanks for joining another edition of Hypermode Live today. My name is Will, and we're joined by our Hypermode CEO, Kevin Van Gundy. Hey, Kevin.
Oh, hey, what's up? I'm actually now looking at our display names, and I feel like I totally whiffed. Where you've got this like delightful William Lyon with your Twitter handle, and I'm just Kevin. Like we just like found me this guy off the street. Like, oh, this is Kevin.
No, that's how you know you're legit when you can just go by a
Uh,
first name. I have to have
yeah.
all of my certifications and
I
places to
hope to
find me.
someday be the CEO formerly known as Kevin. Um, but how you doing?
Cool. I'm good. It's been a super fun week. It is launch week at Hypermode. Yesterday we
Yeah,
launched Hypermode Agents. It's
yeah,
been super fun to see the reaction of that, and that's what we're here to talk to everyone about joining live.
cool.
Great. Well, should we get into it and maybe set the stage a little bit? Like what is Hypermode Agents? Why are we here? Why should folks be like excited about this?
We I guess we can. So for those, I don't know, maybe just tuning into Hypermode, or their first Hypermode live, I often like, especially when we're talking to customers or like we've been doing a lot of these analyst briefings and like CIO roundtables, and a lot of what we talk about with folks is like, well, why Hypermode, or like what's like the fundamental issue that Hypermode's aiming to solve, and I think most succinctly, it's the best thing you can possibly do to help AI actually like meet the hype is the person who is training and building that agent needs to be the person who knows the most about like the job that you're trying to get that agent to do. Where I think historically we've had to like introduce all this artifice of there was specialized knowledge required to build with AI, to build even just like programs like if for the one of like the constant conflicts between like a designer and a front end engineer, right, was the designer didn't know how to write the code, and so you have all these conflicts. We're running into the same thing now with Hypermode. Is A lot of folks are still taking that old paradigm of, oh, I need a data scientist, I need a specialized type of engineer who is going to take information from someone who knows about a process, translate that into a bunch of blank chain code or crew code or AI SDK code, and then compound that with a model and some prompts, and then come back to that subject matter expert like, hey, I've recreated your job or a part of your job using AI. What do you think? And typically the reaction, you've missed all of the nuance. That is 80% good. That is like the worst intern I've ever hired. And Hypermode Agents is our attempt to solve that problem, where Will and I are going to show you guys a whole bunch more about this. But the entire premise is like, how do we make it easy for folks to essentially get started quickly in a no code, no config way, just start to build and understand how these systems work. No specialized skills required. If you can use Slack, you can use Hypermode Agents. And from there, you can then start to like build specialized workflows and specialized tools and set them on triggers and have them talk to each other and do all this really complex work. But it all kind of starts with this basis premise of I whisper dreams into a box, and then the box does work for me. One of the things that we're introducing as part of our free plan is, what should be your first agent. This should be something that gives you a little bit of help immediately, and that's Sidekick. And I'll demo Sidekick in a second. Where, funnily enough, organically, a lot of the members of Hypermode all built this agent at first. I know Andrew McNeely, who leads our sales organization. Like literally, this is like the first thing he did. It was like, oh, well, I've got 10 meetings a day. I have no idea who I'm meeting with until like the second I get on the call. And I'd love to have, someone, if I had an SDR, if I had an assistant, they would go through and review my schedule, prep for my upcoming meetings, come up with an agenda, tell me who I'm meeting with, et cetera. And so um, we rolled that out to everyone. Um, Go ahead, Will.
I think that framing in that context is super helpful of you don't need an ML engineer to put AI agents into production. And it's not just that you don't need an ML engineer to put AI agents in production. It's often that that can be a hindrance, right? Like if you do that, um, and you have this like super long feedback loop, this disconnect from the subject matter expert who is, you know, providing input on like the jobs to be done, the tasks that the agent is to complete, and you have this disconnect from who's actually building the agent doing that. That can actually be a huge hindrance to your speed of development, to getting things actually to the state where you're solving problems. So I think that that is
Oh
like a
yeah.
really good way to frame that in a good like context, I think, to set of like what we set out to solve with hypermode, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we saw versions of this back when you and I worked at Neo4j together. Is you'd have kind of the application team and then the database architecture team, and you'd watch these really long loops of trying to like model data. How do we figure out the right way to structure this? And I think what's wild is like those teams are kind of like adjacent. They speak with like what I'll call like very similar jargon and nomenclature. And then when you start to like really pull those apart and say, I've got this ML engineer and a sales ops person or a chip design engineer, mechanical engineer, they speak in such different languages and such different worlds. Those like that latency is just so huge. Um, and again, maybe another thing to call out, we tend to talk about this a lot as like you got your exploration phase and then your production phase. And one of the other things we call out here is in that exploration phase, we give you this enormous library of MCP connections. For those who aren't familiar with MCP, really just means like a specialized set of tools that allow you to have your agent interact with external services, whether this is LinkedIn as like a public service or your Slack or your GitHub account or your Linear or your sales, your CRM. We have a really long tail of offerings there. But then again, as you start to get more specialized, maybe you're again talking about that AI platform team. Maybe they come in and say, hey, you know what, like the off the shelf Salesforce MCP servers, it's a little aggressive, gives a little bit too much autonomy to these agents. We've rolled our own that maybe has more conservative tools accessible on it and so forth. And so again, like during that exploration phase, we really want to make sure that the field is open for you to try lots of stuff. Um, Other piece that I love to call out when we demo this or talk to folks, um, a lot of like the promise of AI. I think like people are kind of stuck in this like synchronous AI world, and I even caught myself today where I was doing some research on a project that we're working on, and I was getting irritated where I like assigned Hypermode a bunch of work to do for me, and I pulled up the Google sheet that I was waiting for, and I just sat there and I watched it work. And like halfway through, I was like, this is really dumb. Like, what am I doing? Like, my job is not to sit here and like because I'm working on this. My job is not to sit here and like observe the agent work. In reality, I can schedule that work and say, hey, Hypermode, I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee. I'm gonna go, hop into a meeting. I'm gonna go do a live with Will. When I come back, make sure that this crap is done. Make sure that you've done this research that I've asked you to do. And so, again, one of the things we've introduced in Threads is the ability to capture these tasks and then essentially schedule them like, hey, every morning do this. In reaction to some other event, do this. When one agent finishes a job, you pick up this other work with the output assets. And again, I think that actually starts to capture the how does AI actually make my life better and give me time back? It's again, it's asynchronous work. My job is not to sit there and like coach the agent the whole time.
I like to think of the tasks as like the, I guess, the task abstraction as like
Hmm.
training our agent, right? So I interact with the agent, I tell them what to do. I have these connections to like empower the agent to act on my behalf. And once it's done something successful for me, we'll show you an example of this in a minute. But I can, like, to Kevin's point, save that as a task that I can then repeatedly invoke later on. And so
Yeah,
now I've given my agent like a very specific skill.
yeah. And to me, again, like these like moments of like how is hypermode different or how do we think differently? One of the things that like upsets me most is when you meet these people who have min-maxed in this like prompt engineering skill of they write this 43-page prompt for OpenAI of all these like really long documents of hey, do this and that and structure it this way and this way. And again, like I'm very impressed by a lot of the outputs these folks can generate, but it just seems so orthogonal to the way in which like a human would actually work. where, again, you've worked with me a long time, Will. Almost never do I show up with, a perfect 48-page document of here's all the work we're going to do for the next 12 months, in the developer experience category. It's one-off notes like, hey, Will, I was thinking about this thing. What do you think? Oh, hey, could we do some research on this? Maybe this is a good conference for us. And again, like that task training, we've tried to recreate that same interaction pattern of, again, like reasonable chunks of text of like, maybe a sentence or two. And then that call and response, the agent is actually helping you train it, where it's like, hey, is this what you wanted from me? Oh no, let's pivot it slightly and so forth. Which again, I think there's a great like anecdote from Brett Taylor in the Latent Space podcast where he's talking about a lot of AI tooling right now is like we're in the like Waymo era of AI, where we've taken a regular car and like strapped a bunch of cameras to it and put an algorithm on it and said, hey, this is a self-driving car, which is like a wonderful, like, logical progression. But I have to imagine that the next generation of cars, maybe there isn't a steering wheel. Maybe the seats point inward. Maybe like the car is configured differently because I'm not worried about a human driving it. And I think right now we're watching a lot of these anti-patterns of us conforming to the way in which AI works today, rather than trying to like fit it to the purpose, which is how do you augment the capabilities of a human. Um, and maybe the last thing I'll share before we start demoing stuff. Um, I really love this bifurcation. I think it was Alvesh who made this. I don't quote me. I love our design team so much. But in like 24 hours, I think it was Alvesh. And if it's Mary, I'm super sorry that I'm misattributing the work. Um, but I love this bifurcation of like natural language is the way in which we expect you to like to build, coach, and like work with the agents. And in the exploration phase, it should be zero friction. And then when you like ratchet to the next layer below and say, okay, this needs to be embedded somewhere. I need to worry about scaling. I need to integrate it more deeply with maybe data you don't expose to the internet that doesn't have MCP servers. You can then eject the DNA of that agent to code, and it's just normal software. And then you hand that to your engineering team, and all the primitives and abstractions are exactly what they would expect. It's either Golang or TypeScript or whatever they're expecting, and it's just it's data, it's models, it's an API, and it just kind of works. Any thoughts before I start showing product? Will?
Well, I think this hits at the other end of what we were talking about earlier. This idea of we don't need ML engineers to put AI agents into production initially. We need the subject matter experts to help craft and train these agents and get these agent interactions and figure out the connections piece first. But at the same time, like when we go to scale and we're thinking about having thousands of agents acting on our behalf, right? We need to have perhaps some sort of additional complexity that we need to manage in the Modus framework, which is the open source framework that that Hypermode Agents, threads, and all of this runs on. And so that like eject to code experience, I think, is really important to show like how that works with the natural language getting started with Hypermode Agents. So I feel like that's a bit of a natural balancing, right? Is like you want
Mhm.
to be able to get started with agents to solve real problems with the domain experts, not necessarily writing code, more like describing the goal that you're trying to solve. But then you also want the configuration, complexity, all of these things, adding more specific things in code, writing Modus functions directly gives you that power. So I think that's a really interesting paradigm, and this is like largely
I
what
think,
Hypermode
yeah,
is all about.
I think one thing that like you drove by and like it like lit this light bulb up for me that I think is really important to say. I think like especially, again, like there are many other products out there, but one of the things that like as a software buyer, I bought tens of millions of dollars worth of software at Vercel, and Ryan, our engineering product leader, bought hundreds of millions of dollars worth of software back at Manulife. One of the things we've talked a lot about is like there's so much change going on in the AI ecosystem. One of the things we wanted to make sure that we did was, for our customers and our users, there should be an escape hatch no matter what happens and changes. And so both that escape hatch for you're building this beautiful WYSIWYG, it's amazing, it's delightful, But let's say you need to add you know, some additional like functionality that you just can't get through the threads interface. Great, you can do that in code. But I think like the nuance there that I want to emphasize is because that code is open source, and yes, like we host it for you, eject a code, it's instantly lit up as a serverless function on Hypermode, like a serverless scalable function on Hypermode. That code is open source, and no matter what, this agent that is like running your mission critical workflows, you can take it with you, and you're not, again, you're not locked in. It's extensible. Again, if maybe Modus doesn't have all the right behaviors, you can obviously pull requests are open. You extend Modus, but that is an open source thing that is, it's Apache 2 licensed. It's out there in the universe. And anybody evaluating these like agent builder platforms, I would look for the like, what's day two look like if, let's say, you're building on Writer and they say, hey, your renewal is $1 million. You say, oh my gosh, I can't afford that. All that work you've done and all those agents that you've built are now like trapped in that platform. And it's one of the things, again, like I don't know if it's maybe the best business move, but I think strategically for like the health of the AI ecosystem, it was something that, like, and you were a big advocate for this as well. Something that I'm really happy that we've done is make sure that like those agent assets are portable and open source.
Open source, I think, is so important for the reasons you mentioned, but also think of like Lego bricks, and it's
Mm,
really important to not just have like a platform that makes all of the decisions for you about all of the different pieces you're going to use all throughout the stack, right? We want things to be incrementally adoptable. We want things to be plug and play, and being open source allows us to more easily build integrations, swap out different components of the AI stack. So I think that's
yeah.
super important, to make sure you're building on open source for sure.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, to be fair, we are open source nerds. Like at least like actually your entire career and my nearly my entire career have been open source. So, little column A, little column B. Okay, finally we are showing you guys Hypermode's new agents experience. Um, so this is again, ignore all the agents that I built. And maybe this is a great sign. We are hyper users of Hypermode here. I start my day with it. I interact with it probably 25 times a day. Um, but if you didn't, if you were just logging in, you'd only see Sidekick to start. And again, Sidekick has like 4 tasks pre-baked within it. This is an agent that again is like it's optimized to be a personal assistant. And so one, obviously, you solve the blank slate problem. Hey, what are ways that I can work with you? And Sidekick can be like, hey, I can do your daily prep for you. I can do research on people you're going to be meeting with, etc. But also you can extend and add new tasks to again your personal assistant you build on your own. And so again, you counter on it, contextual briefing, follow up tracking of, hey Kev, you promised Will that you were going to do X Y Z. Give me a reminder or draft the email or doc that's supposed to use. But one of the ones I use quite literally every day is I kick off my day and ask Sidekick like what's happening to me today. And we're doing a little bit of a trust fall here where this is my actual calendar. I did a brief audit to make sure that I didn't have anything silly on there. But for the sake of time, one of the things that, again, I have Sidekick do this for me asynchronously. What it's doing is it's going through with every external meeting that I have, hopping on LinkedIn and saying, who am I about to meet with? Who are they? How are we connected, et cetera. And so I ran this beforehand, and we can flip back just to kind of show. And basically, it has all of the meetings that I've got this week. Now, I'm going to meet with Derek. I'm meeting with Devolver. Vieko is a good friend who was a Vercel customer and so forth. Meeting with Dan. I might say like, oh, who is Dan Levine? And it'll go ahead and like do some more research on it. And this is what I think like the difference between like just like a flat what's it called? Like a flat agenda. I can actually like go out and like ask questions of this system. And maybe I'm walking into the meeting, or maybe I'm meeting with Dan, and I'm like he makes a comment about some investment that he's made. I can ask a question like, hey, tell me more about Dan's relationship to XYZ company. And so this has been a huge asset to me. Um, you know, especially like as I do lots of external meetings, that I can be like, oh, Dan's a partner Excel. Oh, he's invested in Scale. Scale does much great data labeling. And so again, this has just been like such a fun tool to play with. And again, it's free. Pay us $0, get value from us, enjoy it, and then obviously Will can now show you how to build custom agents.
Cool. Yeah, I've actually really enjoyed Sidekick a lot more than I realized, or a lot more than I thought I would initially. Like, because I was talking with Raphael earlier this morning about this, and it's like, hey, we're working with our calendar so much so frequently. It's like the thing that controls our schedule throughout the day, and we use it as this planning tool. And there have been so many attempts to create this visual representation of the calendar, color
Mhm.
coding, like all these things. And to improve on that, I think with an agent, that really requires I think something significant, right? And even just being able to do this research task is a big improvement over something that has been like central to your life for years, and like so many iterations to be improved on. One thing that I discovered that the Raf actually suggested this morning was using Sidekick to find meetings without an agenda. And my initial take was, oh great, I'll just tell it to cancel all meetings that don't have an agenda. But Raf talked me back from that. He said, well, Will, you should probably use it to suggest agenda items. So that's what I've been doing
I
with
like that.
Sidekick.
Yeah, well, and especially again, you can extend these agents quite a bit. One of the things, again, I didn't show it, but what I've done for my Sidekick Plus Plus is I've added my both my Gmail and my Notion, and I ask it to go out and check and say, hey, exactly that of like, I need you to suggest an agenda. The last time I talked to Will, what were we talking about? Where what are my meeting notes? And again, it's been wildly helpful for just being a slightly more efficient CEO.
And I think that idea of connections is super powerful, right? So Kevin mentioned
Yeah.
these connections are MCP servers that I think of them as like um, empowering our agents to act on our behalf by connecting to different services and data. And I think when you're able to start to connect multiple connections, you can really see like where the power of agents comes in. Cool. Well, I want to show a little bit about how we can create additional agents to work with. And to do that, folks can follow along live if you'd like. I shared a link in the chat, the hypermode.com/login. You'll be prompted to create a workspace, and you'll see this environment that I'm showing now with Sidekick, and that's the default sort of free trial or say free tier experience where we have one agent, Sidekick, who's our personal assistant, and we have the Google Calendar connection. Um, what I think I want to show now, though, is if we upgrade to Pro tier, and so there are a couple ways to upgrade to Pro tier. One is schedule your onboarding. We do this so we can kind of walk you through the abstractions and really like get some feedback, especially while this is a newer tool. It's really helpful for us to see like what do folks want to build with this,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
set expectations.
yeah, one of the things that we were heavily inspired by was if anyone here has used Superhuman's email client, I think there's like especially with any new like platform tool, there's like a relatively steep impedance curve. And we were really inspired by the way like Superhuman, again, even to today, you schedule an onboarding call with a Superhuman team and they show you how, hey, here are hotkeys, here's how to set up your inbox. They kind of debug the first few steps with you. And we watched where we would have maybe 20-25% be successful when we just like handed them the things and good luck, to now it's probably a 90+% success rate where just that like 10-minute, hey, here are the knobs, here are the levers, has been just wildly successful. And so that's why we do that. It's not because we want to create a bunch of friction. It's just, again, we're really proud of the thing we've done and we really want to make sure people succeed with it.
Totally. But for folks that are watching live now and joining today,
This is your
we
onboarding call.
exactly we super appreciate the time you're spending with us. So we're gonna unlock Pro Tier now with a secret URL. So hypermode.com/fast-track. We'll drop this in the chat. And so if we go to that URL, if we're not signed in, that'll prompt us to sign in. Or if we are signed in, it will give us this prompt for an access code. And the access code that we're going to use for today is hype-live launch. We'll drop that in the chat as well. And that is going to unlock 1 month of free Hypermode Pro. And the immediate thing that we'll notice is we have this new agent, Concierge. So Concierge is, I guess, like our AI agent to help us understand and guide us through the process of describing like the role and background that we want for an agent to create an agent, right? So I guess an agent to build agents maybe is a way to think
It
about
gets
that.
really meta really quickly, especially when you have like an agent constructing an agent who's constructing some other agents. But yeah, it works.
Cool. Yeah, and by the way, like as we're going through this, feel free to drop any questions in the chat or share any thoughts or feedback. Like super important. Like Kevin was saying, to understand like what folks are wanting to build. What do you think you would use this for? And then any feedback or thoughts, questions, definitely drop it in the chat, and we'll get to those. The first thing I want to point out is it's like, oftentimes I'm thinking,
I love that deployments are happening in the background as we're demoing Will. That's a
should I
little refresh
refresh
when
to
you
get
guys.
the latest?
You probably just for folks again as you're working Hypermode. We ship probably 8 or 10 times a day. And so you'll see that little tile come up where I'll say refresh. Just know that means that we are furiously working behind the scenes to make the product better. And sometimes we make the product worse, but almost always eventually it gets way better. And so again, like have patience
Rarely
with
make
us
it
as
worse.
we rarely. Well, I mean, to be fair, I do still have commit privileges to our Git repo, so there's always that chaos monkey element.
Nice. So one thing that I think a lot of people see when they see like the blank text box, the blank page, it's like, what do you want to create? And folks kind of think, well, I don't know, like what kind of agent do I want to create? And so the one task we have here is, well, here's a task to suggest agents that we could build. And so that's a good way to get started, is like, hey, let's have Concierge suggest some agent ideas, and come up with fun little names. From my experience, what I think is most interesting for the type of agent to build is one that I think saves you time, right? Like I think of these agents as kind of like an intern, right? And I can have many of them, and they're maybe not doing something that I'm not able to do myself, but rather they're doing something that is something I'm repeating a lot, something that if I could automate, or if I could chain these tools together, that's going to save me a bunch of time. So that's kind of how I think of like, what are things that I do a lot, or wish that I had time to do, that would save me time in my typical daily routine. And one of those things that I'm frequently doing is something like taking complex code and trying to get developers excited about that, right? So oftentimes I'm like building an app, building a demo app, or something, and then I want to be able to explain how that works, or use that to create content to highlight certain features in Hypermode or other open source tools. So let's create a maybe like social media developer agent. So I want to create an agent that can analyze GitHub repos and explain concepts to developers in maybe like a social media format. So I want to, generate posts that I might put out there to help explain how some of these applications we're building work. It says, hey, is this an agent represent a company or just you? And so we can see like Concierge is going to walk us through this process to help refine like the role and background we're giving to our agent. So we'll say, yes, the company is Hypermode. And we can see here this tool call, company research. And so I haven't added any connections yet, but there are built-in tools. So tools, you can think of these as ways that an agent is able to interact on its environment. And there are a number of built-in tools. One of those is a company research tool. And so here we can see that Concierge went out. So, hey, I said I work for Hypermode, so we need to get some like brand information about Hypermode. And so that's what this tool was. Cool. So we want to focus on code structure and concepts, summarizing project goals. I mean, like, yes, I want all of this, right?
And for maybe a little bit of background of what's happening. So as you again, you're interacting with concierge. Well, you can keep going. I can just kind of talk over. So what's happening is basically this agent is trying to construct essentially like the Modus app that goes underneath that is actually the thing that will power your agent. So it'll be identifying what's the appropriate model, what's the appropriate system prompt, what connections might you need. And so as it's constructing that agent, basically what it's going to do as soon as our agent feels confident that it knows enough about what you're trying to achieve, it'll say, you know what, okay, no, I've asked enough questions, let me make you that agent, and then I'll go ahead and deploy that agent, and you'll see it on the left hand sidebar. But again, kind of the expectation, I think a lot of the folks on this live are probably again on the continuum of like AI neophyte to AI expert, are probably close to the AI expert side. And so you might have like a, hey, move faster, just give me the thing. But a lot of what we're designing this for is if you have a less technical person in your org that you're supporting, we want them to, again, if they, especially if they don't know how to speak AI, are able to essentially build an agent that actually does what they need it to do. And then in the sidebar, I see a couple of questions from Founder Labs. Can we interact with this from the outside? Instant agentic flow from like N8N or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I love N8N. It's a phenomenal product. You could definitely have either a Hypermode agent reaching out and hitting N8N and saying, "Hey, I've done some data pipeline work, and I want to go put the outputs into a N8N flow," or vice versa, where you'd say, "Hey, I have some task that I want N8N to execute on my behalf." That lives in Hypermode. Uh, I tend to think about a lot of these systems as like polyglot, where every org is going to have different optimizations that they're trying to make, and as an open platform, we want to be able to integrate with again, if you've built a LangChain agent, we want that to work alongside your Hypermode agent, and if you have like N8N workflows, we want that to absolutely be working alongside your Hypermode agents. And then I see Gabe asked, um, I have essentially a lat long file that I'd like to add a property to these JSON files. Um, yeah, you definitely could essentially have connect your Git repo and then have your agent do some work and then append that file. I will warn you, like we're not the best coding agents. You should definitely use Cursor or Copilot or Windsurf. But yeah, for like lightweight coding work, totally. Like I use Hypermode all the time to update our website, for example.
This is true. I can vouch for that.
Yeah. Well,
What
and sometimes it goes a little wild, but
and in this case, and what I've found to be a good workflow with GitHub and sort of pushing commits to GitHub is first to have the agent create an issue, so describe what you want it to do, and then create an issue kind of that describes this problem, and then ask the agent to open a pull request to address the issue. And this kind of, if you have any sort of like deployment pipeline set up with deploys on PRs and branches, that kind of will allow you to see those changes before merging that in. And in this case, where you're asking to sort of take a look at the content of a GeoJSON file and then add something following the structure of the GeoJSON file. I think that's something like that agents are pretty good at it. I've actually been surprised. I was playing around with geocoding and geocoding polygons specifically, because a lot of the geocoding services will give you like a point, but oftentimes if I'm talking about like a city or a country, I want like the bounding polygon. And it was really surprising to me that some of the models were actually quite good at that and quite good at generating valid GeoJSON with polygons that were pretty close and good enough for the case of what I was playing with. So this is a use case where I think you might actually have some success there. So yeah, that's a cool one.
It sounds like the code might not be working for some will. Hyperlive launch might not be working. Again, I'll edit this out later when we do publish the recording. You guys use KVG. That's like the master key. So you can get access that way. Just KVG, just the 3 letters.
Cool. Yeah, and that
And
that
I'm
was the
used to
code
Brian. By the way, Brian, yes, this will be the recording will be available later. If you missed the beginning. Sorry, Will, you were saying.
Cool. Yeah. No, I was just saying that definitely check for a typo or something, because that code worked for me when I went through it, which is what unlocked the piece for me. So maybe I typoed it when I pasted it in the chat or something. But cool. KVG worked. Cool. Great. Okay. Cool. So let's maybe go through, take a look at our GitHub repo explainer agent, and then come back to address some of the comments that I see coming in. So cool. So like what Kevin was saying earlier is we went through this process with the concierge to basically define these instructions, right? So here's identity, context, and we can also create an agent if we are really good at writing system prompts. Like we can create an agent manually and just sort of describe the instructions here and choose what model we want to orchestrate our agents. But I think the concierge is a good way to help us kind of ideate through what exactly should we be including in that role and background description.
So I will admit that like I do often reach for that system prompt if like let's say my agent is like 85% of the way there. Again, excuse me, created by the concierge, I will then like fall back to that and like add like hints to my agent that haven't made it into memory yet of like, oh hey, by the way, when I say PR, I don't mean public relations. In your context, I mean pull request. Sometimes there's like nomenclature and jargon things that it takes some repetition to train the agent. And if you're just irritated and impatient like me, I do often like edit that system prompt as like as a fallback.
So I'm going to add GitHub connection. So I've authenticated GitHub previously, so my agent can now connect to GitHub, and you can see these connections. These are MCP servers, but a way that enable our agent to interact with this environment. There are, I think we have over 2,000 different connections now, something like that. So if there's something specific you're searching for, you can certainly search and see those pop up. Also, the docs have some good. I'll share a link to our agent gallery in a second that can give you an idea of some of the things you can build and some of the connections you can use. But there are lots and lots of connections to lots of services, which is really cool. Cool. So I added my connection to GitHub. So I want to analyze my Hypernews GitHub repo, and let's write 10 to 20 tweets that explain concepts from the repo. So this Hypernews, this is a kind of a demo project I've been working on that fetches data from various news sources, builds a knowledge graph, and exposes that through MCP. There's a Modus app in there. There's some embeddings, vector search in there. So there's a lot of different pieces in there. So we're going to tell our agent we wanted this one. Confirm if it is public. It is public. Let's see. Try using the GitHub tool to access Hypernews.
It's
So
funny
sometimes we
when
need...
I first started using Hypermode agents, like I would get irritated when this would happen. And now, like again, like one of the things like I've become like quite happy with is like by going through this like clarification step. Very often you were like then giving that agent like the very specific set of instructions of like, hey, go to this specific file in the repo, XYZ, rather than expecting it to zero shot. Like I always take this mentality of like I've just hired a triple PhD intern, but of course they don't know how I work. They've learned how to work in kind of a general abstract sense, and now I need to be like, okay, it's in the Hypermode Inc. / mono repo whatever. And then the nice part is when you extract that as a task, it's quite durable as an actual. And then Will, it looks like you're interacting with Concierge right now.
Oh no.
This is why we do this onboarding, Will.
That's right. I did that refresh, and that took me back to Concierge. So let's try this again. Analyze my Hypernews.
And while Will's talking to the right agent, I can answer a couple more questions on the chat. Glenn, your parent seems locked up. Again, it's a beta. I'm sorry. Try hitting refresh, or if you see the kind of that pink button in the bottom right corner, sometimes you can just stop the thread and retrigger. We have found that with like certain models, like OpenAI has been kind of brittle lately, where you may have to essentially stop the thread and then re-push that same request. We're starting to look at like failure logic of if 4.1 fails, do we have a default fallback to retry with 4.1 mini, or maybe there's an outage at OpenAI, go fall back to Claude or something like that. But for now, yeah, just try a refresh or stop and restart. Brendan, it's good to see you, man. Yes, you too can have a KVG Lego avatar in your agent. The avatars are one that you can right click and randomize them in the info panel. You can also upload your own. Again, when we go GA, it's unlikely that we'll keep the Lego avatars. We just thought they were fun for kind of like, builder mode. But yeah, you can upload different avatars or choose random ones.
I'm told that this one shares an appearance with me, so I'll leave it on this one. Cool. So while Kevin was going through that, we were able to use the GitHub search repositories tool to find our Hypernews repo, and then you can see that it fetched several files, the README, and several other code files to understand the contents of the repo. And we can see here now we've written 20 tweets that help explain what's going on in there. Let's say, can you update those? Update those tweets to include code samples where it makes sense. I think it's important to be able to share code samples in the context of these tweets. That's super helpful for explaining technical concepts, right? And so now we can see our agents going back and fetching more files from our GitHub repo. And cool. And we can see like some of these now include code snippets. Not all of them, right? Like if we're talking about use cases, that doesn't make sense to include a code snippet. But certainly when we're talking about certain Python code, when we're looking at querying our knowledge graph, here's a DQL query searching our news graph, so that makes sense. Cool. So the next thing I want to do, and like I said earlier, that I think it's really powerful when you are chaining together, when you're connecting multiple connections to be able to have your agent act on your behalf. So I just added the Notion connection, and I'm going to say write these tweets to my Notion Scratchpad page. So I'm going to queue these up to be sent out later on. And so here our agent is going to use the Notion connection that I just added. First, I think it's going to search for page titled Scratchpad and then should update that. And I have this open over here. So maybe we can see if this works and watch this update my Scratchpad page in real time here. Cool. And I see a question here that's relevant for the piece we're going through now for Founder Labs, asking, okay, is this able to post on social media for my behalf? Could I do it on a schedule? If I give it interesting articles or transcripts, these sorts of things, use sources for other ideas. Yes, that's a good question. I'm not sure if we actually, I haven't played around with this yet, but do we have, there's a LinkedIn MCP connection, and I don't know if we have one
So
for X.
I have had it post on my behalf before. I guess what I will say is um, I would encourage you to do it in draft mode. Just again, like I'm such a huge fan of like human in the loop flows. We actually have a customer who's doing this where they're a direct to consumer brand, and a lot of what they're doing is like reacting to what's lively. They do automate all of this, but it's if there's a trend in their category kind of spiking off, they immediately have an agent essentially write a bunch of um, messages, tweets, ads, and then automatically post those. Um, if again with like the default hypermode experience, like it's gonna post as you. And I don't know, maybe I'm like I'm an overly cautious person, but anytime something's gonna be said in my name, I'm like, oh, I want to read it before it goes. But you totally could. It's very much up to you.
Cool. Yeah, and so while we're chatting there, the agent updated my Scratchpad page in Notion. So I have these queued up and ready to go. Which again, I'm gonna make a few tweaks to these before I post them, perhaps. But yeah, we also saw how we could wire that up to LinkedIn to post on our behalf. Cool. So that was just a look at one sort of example agent using Concierge. We introduced this idea of connections and how we can connect to multiple services, GitHub and Notion here. The thing that now I think is really powerful, we talked about this idea of like training the agent. So I've gone through this stage of, okay, it analyzed my GitHub repo, drafted me some tweets. This is something I want to repeat, right? So this is where we can create a task. So I clicked on this create task, and now this thread, this like successful interaction that we had with our agent, we're now going to create detailed instructions so that this is repeatable for our agents going forward, and save this so that we could then invoke this going forward. This is, I think, a good way to think of like adding skills to our agent. So here's the detailed instructions based on our interaction. I'm going to save that as a task. And so now in the future, when I create a new thread with this agent, I have the task available here that I can kick off and run. Similar to when I was in Sidekick, these are all tasks that are kind of predefined instructions ready for how I can interact with that agent. So that's the task abstraction. Cool. Well, I think that is everything that I wanted to show in this example. I think this is a super fun tool to play around with, Hypermode Agents. We talked about this as kind of the experience for domain experts to create these agents. We then talked about this idea of eject to code. This is running on top of Modus, our open source agent framework, which we've talked about in previous live streams. If you've been following our streams and our tooling that we've been working on, this is, I think, the next iteration of what you can build on top of Modus.
But maybe the thing I'll ask to this group, one of the things that a lot of our users and customers struggle with is just kind of this idea of like blank slates. Again, it's kind of like the early cohort of I don't know, our Hypermode agents. We gotta come up with a cool name, but friends of the company. I would love to see all the cool stuff you guys build. If you're comfortable sharing it publicly, I love screenshots on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. If you're not, DM me on Slack or shoot me an email, like k@hypermode.com, kvg@hypermode.com. Again, just I want to see what y'all are building, and even if that feedback is like, hey, I bumped into a brick wall and I couldn't figure out how to do the next thing, that is perfectly acceptable, and I want to help you through that hurdle. I did
For
see a
sure.
handful of graph questions. Will is like the person who's been working on a lot of these graph integrations. Do you want to chat through anything specifically? Maybe tease some agent memory.
Yeah, I think that so we've talked a bit about knowledge graphs and Hypermode. We build and maintain dgraph, this open source graph database. I think there are use cases for knowledge graphs in the context of agents in two cases. One is sort of the enterprise-wide, like, source of truth knowledge graph, and you're using something like a graph rag pattern where I'm doing maybe a vector search as an index into the knowledge graph and then traversing through the graph to find the relevant content. And I'm including that in the context of my prompt to make sure that the agent has relevant context to be able to answer the question. That's one piece, and that knowledge graph is typically shared throughout the enterprise as a source of truth. But then I think on the other end of that spectrum, there's another use case for knowledge graphs, which is in the context of agent memory, where I'm constructing a knowledge graph based on the interactions between a single user and a single agent. And that is built up over time based on my interactions, and that the agent is able to query that memory knowledge graph to, again, similarly, to provide the right context, but in a different manner, right? There's a bit of like a time decay. So like more recent memory is probably more relevant. So the way that we query that is a bit different. So that, I think, is really the power of knowledge graphs. In Modus, we expose knowledge graphs in a couple of different ways. One is through the dgraph client. There also supports Neo4j directly as direct abstractions in the Modus SDK. There's also this idea of an embedded version of dgraph called Modus Graph that is embedded in each Modus project. And so this is more where we would be using that for agent memory. That's also used to keep track of your inference history. Think of that as like model tracing your the results of your model inferences over time. So lots of interesting applications for graphs in the AI agent ecosystem for sure.
Any other questions coming in? Rohit asked, events should always sign its work with tag and notion format. Um, so I wouldn't do that as a skill. That would actually be something that I would add into the system prompt, or you can obviously ask Hypermode to do it for you. But I actually do that with a lot of the agents I have that post for me on Slack. Basically, I'll take like the name of the agent and like we'll write like, Simon says blank, and then like whatever message it's adding to Slack or Gmail or whatever it may be.
I see another interesting question here from Gabriel asking about, could I replicate Puppeteer features, which is what, like a headless browser for being able to interact with an app, clicking certain buttons, the sort of thing. Certainly possible. We built an app that did a version of this for a client using Modus. This would be maybe something where the eject to code is a good way to add this sort of logic. We certainly, I think, might want to look at adding the computer use tooling to Hypermode agents, certainly, but there's certainly the computer use tools out there that would give you this sort of interaction. So something where initially I think the code first approach might be the way to go there.
So Founder Labs had another question of what's best use to know 4 years worth of call transcripts, markdown notes in a knowledge graph, or agent to be used. I think this is actually where one of the things why we're so bullish on this like shared agent context concept that we expose as a knowledge graph, like it's more of an implementation detail, is like you could build 100 different things on it. And I think that's maybe that's kind of the blank slate problem. But if you essentially expose that thing as a knowledge graph or a Modus graph, um, and then you could expose it to all your different agents as again like as like another MCP server tool of like, hey, like when you're doing XYZ, you can reach out to that system. um what would I do first? I guess maybe like I'm always trying to figure out ways to make myself. I've always been really charmed by people who, when you walk up to them, they have like that like eidetic memory for like, oh hey Kevin, the last time we talked, you were talking about XYZ. I was thinking about, and like there's such like a warmth to that and of like making someone feel very welcome. That's probably the first use case I'd work on of like, hey, I want you to go through and crawl through, the last 4 years worth of notes. And anytime I'm interacting with someone, like give me that rich context so that again I can show up in a really nice way when I interact with them. But yeah, there's a million different cool things you could do. Follow-ups, yeah, there's a bunch of great stuff, or even just like train on how you like to write and talk. And it's another thing that we've spent a lot of time on internally here at Hypermode. Of we actually have agents write a lot of our marketing content, and getting an agent to kind of talk like you rather than like the median tech blog post that you see on the internet is quite difficult. And again, giving it that much context would be really really helpful for informing that writing style and behavior.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I added a couple links that I dropped in. One is for the agent gallery, which is a handful of examples of agents that we've created and had some success with. Just to, I guess, look at some inspiration, that sort of thing. Also added a link to the Discord. So definitely join our public Discord. That's a great way to connect with us as well. We're going to do another one of these live streams next week. I think the same day. I think it's on Tuesday. Dan is going to do that one with me, and we're going to just share some agents that we've created. Take a look at some interesting things. Maybe we'll try to do some live agents. So if there's a specific type of agent you want to create, maybe we'll try to build that live. Cool, Kevin. Anything you want to add to end on?
Honestly, like, it's just a call like build some cool stuff and tell us about it. and again, like I take this stuff so seriously in terms of like we want to build a truly extraordinary product. And again, I'm deputizing all of you. You are all now like the again, we gotta come up with a cool name for it. Like you guys are again like the early friends of the company. And uh, you know, anytime like the analogy I talk a lot about internally, and if any of you've spoken to me one on one, I've probably said this to you. Like the thing I think about a lot about when um, folks are building products is like when someone walks into a house and they kind of reach for a light switch and they just hit wall, and it's that like mildly disorienting feeling. Um, I so badly want to make sure that we've put all the light switches in the right spots inside Hypermode so that everything feels really, really, really intuitive to you. And so again, as you have those interactions, like, oh my gosh, shoot me a note. Like I treasure that sort of feedback. I also treasure the feedback of it's perfect. I love it. It's changed my life. But I accept that that might not be the first thing you say.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining today. Please sign in, create a workspace, play around with agents, give us your feedback. This is a great time to understand how folks are using and want to use this tooling, and we really appreciate any feedback that folks have, as Kevin said. But we are a bit over time, so thanks very much for everyone for joining today, and hope to see you next week at the Hypermode Live or any of the handful of events that we have coming up in the next few weeks. So thanks a lot, folks. We'll see you next time. Cheers.